Welcome to the hothouse. This is basically an upgraded high tunnel. So the last one we looked at was an intermediate level greenhouse. I would consider this an advanced greenhouse, and it's essentially upgraded from what we last saw. It's the same bows, so the same bows that I got from my friend Andrew at growhoops.ca, and they are modified to this structure because this greenhouse is built on a more robust foundation. This has a climate battery. This has a hydronic floor. This has some automated features such as automated vents. And it has raised beds inside that we'll go in and look at. But basically, this is an advanced high tunnel that's modified. It's 36 feet long, it's 16 feet wide, and it's 13 feet high in the center with 4-foot spacing for bows. We've got all the same features of a classic high tunnel: channel lock and wiggle wire, a sort of standard end wall that's framed, but we've got some advanced features on the foundation. So this greenhouse is built on a 2-foot footing that with a stem wall that's sitting on the outside of the footing. So it's not like a typical house where you would build a footing and then your foundation wall sits in the center. It doesn't sit in the center on this because I wanted to maximize my interior space, and we're not building a house, we're building a greenhouse, so we don't need to have the same structural requirements that you would in a house. But essentially we have a 2-foot footing on an excavated site, and then at this side it's a 2-foot high foundation wall that's set on the outside of that 2-foot footing, and on the back side it's 4 feet high on the outside of that footing, poured all the way around. And it's kind of a funky shape. I must admit that if I were to do this again, I would have just not done this. I would have just done the concrete all the way to that door, but I didn't. I was kind of just winging it. But we have the same roll-up sides as the high tunnel. Again, my friend John Hofer's design, really simple design. I can't roll it up right now because it's deactivated for the winter, but it rolls up in this little piece of ready rod with some 1/2-inch pecs is what holds it in place. And inside we have a hydronic floor, which we'll talk about. And this greenhouse, and we've got some automated vents, which I'll show you more in detail. In the inside, we've got a lot of the same trellising and purlins that were in the last greenhouse in here. We'll look inside as well. But this is a really solid 3 seasons. So this greenhouse is a 3-season greenhouse with the option for 4 seasons by just turning up the dial. That's what's kind of neat about this greenhouse. I can put barely any resources into it. Let's just say I want to function as a normal high tunnel. I don't need to heat it. I don't even need to run the double layer poly if I don't want to. I don't have to put any resources in, and I get a really solid greenhouse that's going to perform better than the intermediate high tunnel just because of the insulation. We have a 3-inch rigid insulation on the outside of this foundation, and we also have steel siding. It's a 7/8 corrugated steel with a flashing. And so it's got more of a wall feature, more of a foundation that you would find in a house, though it's not like you find in a house, but it's close to that. And because it's higher off the ground, it's going to stay warmer year round. So let's go inside and talk about some of the interior features. We've got a standard door, just a standard house door that you would find in any house in here. Some of the interior features we can see right here. So we've got sort of a funky end wall just because of the shape of this concrete. The vents have it's an automated greenhouse vent. There's a gas chamber. I believe it's Freon gas in these things. And basically when it warms up, it opens, and when it cools down, it closes. So I've got them closed now for winter. I don't want them to open and close. But during the springtime season, it's really great because instead of having to rush to roll up the side on a hot day or on a day that warms up quick, this will just do it automatically. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. And you can also automate roll up sides very easily as well. But that's a nice feature on this greenhouse. And this is quite a large vent area, so it does move a lot of air. And in the summertime, this will just kind of be open all the time, and I'll roll up the sides and it'll just move a lot of heat out of the greenhouse really quickly. So just standing here, you can kind of see the foundation wall. We used, it was half a truck, so it would have been about two or three cubic meters of concrete for the footing. And then we used a full truck, which would have been 6 cubic meters of concrete for the top foundation wall. And this was quite a bit of work doing this foundation wall. A lot of forming, a lot of wood was used. But the nice thing about it is that I'm kind of bermed into the back of this sloping area. So I've got a bit of a thermal mass in here besides the ground. And speaking of that, we're standing on a 2-foot deep climate battery of packed sand. And when I originally designed this greenhouse, I didn't plan on doing a climate battery. I was originally only going to do a hydronic floor, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I figured I had enough depth that I said, well, why don't I just try a climate battery and see if 2 feet is enough to do something with. And my thinking here is it's an easy way to dump heat in the ground, because even on a day like this, like it was up to 20 degrees Celsius in here today, my climate battery up there is taking temperature that's probably a little bit warmer than 20 and dumping it underground, distributing it in the ground, and then that air is coming out here and it's warming the ground up, which is beneath these raised beds. And so my thinking on that is it's a fairly cost-effective way to heat the ground. Now, a less cost-effective way, but more effective way, is to run the hydronics. Now let's take a look at this. So this isn't all finished right now. We're actually just kind of still in the middle of doing it. But this floor, so about 3 inches underneath, well, let me lay it down from the bottom profile. So at my base profile, I had a leveled site, which I put some sand on to get it more flat. Put the climate battery down, buried that with about 4 inches of sand, and packed it all along the way. It was packed with water, run a gas-powered packer, packed down really hard. Left about 4 inches on top, then put the hydronics. So 1/2-inch PEX in a very specific pattern runs throughout the entire floor here. Now that is going to run hot water from our wood boiler. So I have 2 ways of heating this greenhouse. I have an active and a passive way. And so these can both be used in a couple different ways. One, they can be used to boost the soil. So I've frozen this greenhouse out for the last 2 months intentionally to basically sterilize the soil and give it a winter in a way. And now I'm going to boost it warm and get crops in here relatively soon. Well, after the new year, once the daylight hours are growing longer, I'll put new crops in here. But this can boost it up. So the passive way is to use air, where I'm only running a 500 CFM fan, putting air underground, slowly warming the degrees of that ground. But if I run the boiler and I want to just turn and burn, I can just crank up the thermostat and run hot water under this ground that will heat it up very quickly. And so that is my sort of experiment with using different forms of heat in this greenhouse, but it's a very important feature. So now that we're standing here, we can talk about some more of the features of this greenhouse. We've got the blower for our climate battery. So this is what is this, an 8-inch, it's an 8-inch inline fan. I believe it's 500 CFM. That's taking air from above because it's warmer above than it is below. And it's pumping that warm air down and distributing it into the network of big O pipe that's here. And so on this climate battery, it's a little bit different than the one that we're going to look at next. But in this one, it's all standard big O pipe. So it's non-perforated big O pipe to go down to create a manifold along the end. And then there's a T-coupling every 6 inches for another big O pipe that for those, I'm using perforated with a sock. And those tee off, and then they go across the whole greenhouse, and then there's another manifold on the end with the same thing. And then the air comes out on the opposite end. So this is, right now it's running and it's dumping warm air in the ground, distributing it everywhere, thereby slowly increasing the temperature of the ground, including the soil in the beds, which will give me a better growing medium once the ground is warmer. All right, so this greenhouse also has a blower. So there's 2 layers of poly on this greenhouse. There's an IRAD layer, which is the interior layer, which is an anti-drip layer of 6 mil greenhouse poly. And then there's a UVA layer, which is a standard 6 mil greenhouse poly. That would be the poly used for all of the greenhouses, but there's an exterior and interior layer. And then there's a blower that's blowing air in between those layers of poly, which gives me a little bit of a gap between the layers and gives me a little bit better of an R value than a single layer of poly. That's the basic idea behind a double layer greenhouse. The other features of this greenhouse are similar to the last high tunnel. We have our hip boards and toe kick boards, which are in kind of different locations because this one is bermed up on the back, so they're higher here. But my wires are placed in the exact same place, in the sense that, I mean, we only have 3 beds in here, but it's the same idea, that I have a trellis wire 6 inches from the edge of each bed, which allows me to, even for example, the remnants of this tomato crop, I can have a tomato crop on this side that's trellised, right, to this one. And then I could have some other field crops here. And in this case, I had peppers here throughout the season. But I could also trellis something to there as well. But I can also take these tomatoes, and this is what I did this season, and I trellis them up. They go from here to there. So they kind of grow in an overhang way. And then, so trellis wires on the same 3 beds. And then we've got our top purlin, which is exactly the same as the last greenhouse, though you can't see it because of the climate battery air ducting. But that's a 6-inch air ducting the whole way. On the next greenhouse, you're going to see, because it's a lot bigger, it's staged down. But this is 6 inches the whole way, going into that 8-inch inline fan, pumping air everywhere else. And so the other features really to talk about are the raised beds. These are 2 foot deep raised beds, 3 feet wide. And I did that to maximize the growing space in here because I knew I wanted a raised bed. To do 4 raised beds just wasn't, the economics didn't make sense. There was too many walkways, it was too much lumber. To do 3 beds and then butt the outside ones right up against the foundation really created a wide open area that I can walk around in, and I've got plenty of access, but I also maximize my growing area. Yes, sure, I have a different bed than my standard 30-inch market garden, but I'm not dogmatic about that. This is still a practical bed because I can reach, and because it's so raised up, I can reach very easily across the entire bed. I can be in this one row here, and I can manage both of these beds. So very simple there. The drip irrigation in this greenhouse is here, and I've actually been trying an experiment where I somewhat bury it so that I get a nice clean seed bed. And at the moment, I'm in the process of cleaning this up and getting this greenhouse ready to start some late winter crops. Let's talk about the performance features of this greenhouse. So this greenhouse is a 3-season with the option of a 4-season greenhouse. So it could be either or. And if you want it to be a 4-season greenhouse, you basically just turn up the dial. I can turn on the hydronics, or I can just start running the climate battery early, have options as to how it would run. So having said that, I could essentially grow in here year round. Now, the challenge we have, and this will be the same for the next greenhouse, is our daylight hours get so low in the winter. Like, we're approaching the winter solstice next week, and we get down to about 6.5 hours of daylight. So without supplemental lighting, you can only do so much in a 4-season in the winter. And so winter growing is really more about us having crops established. But with this greenhouse, I could do a lot more than the other one because I could keep crops alive, but more alive. So if you look in the last greenhouse, we were looking at some of those brassicas and the spinach. It's all really kind of limped down. Just with a little bit of heat in this greenhouse, basically setting my thermostat so that it stays above freezing in here, that would allow me to keep those same crops going, but going a lot better and getting more yield off them. So it's not so much that I can grow tomatoes year round, it's that I can have a very strong crop going through winter. Now in the next greenhouse, I can keep tomatoes going year round with a lot less effort. It's possible in this greenhouse, but because I don't have, I'm not as framed in, I'm not as insulated as our next greenhouse, there's only so much I can do. There's only so much I can push it. But this greenhouse will allow me to be able to be seeding crops in here very early and getting very fast results. So I could come in here in mid-March and be seeding spinach and getting a crop very quickly. Whereas in the unheated greenhouse, it would take a lot longer for that crop to grow. Though it would grow and it likes cool weather, but it'll just grow that much faster in this greenhouse because I can prevent this greenhouse from freezing, which is really the breaking point when it comes to fall and winter crops. So with all of that in mind, this greenhouse cost about $10,000. Okay, so that's a couple concrete pours. That is quite a bit of money on the wood for the raised beds. The climate battery with just the piping alone was about $500. Then of course all this material might have been another $500, $600, $700. Couple doors worth a few $100 each. Just a lot more resources and time went into this greenhouse, but still for $10,000 you get a lot out of that. I would still say hands down our intermediate level high tunnel is going to be the best value for your money. But to go to the next little level, you can get a lot more with a greenhouse like this. Check out my site fromthefield.tv. It's where I post all my vlogs and the vast majority of all my content. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one.